Hello and welcome to People in Profit, France 24's weekly look at the world of business and the economy. I'm Brian Quinn. The U.S. and Israel's war on Iran has thrown energy markets into chaos, largely due to the effective shutdown of the Strait of Hormuz. The 21-kilometer-wide waterway connects the oil and gas-producing nations of the Persian Gulf to the wider seas. In normal times, tankers in this strait carry some 38% of the world's crude oil, 19% of its natural gas, and, crucially, roughly one-third of the world's seaborne agricultural fertilizers. In recent days, ship traffic through the strait has fallen by some 97% as the U.S. and Iran trade threats to the region's energy infrastructure. Now, despite signals of potential de-escalation from both Washington and Tehran on Wednesday, the disruption is already causing severe economic fallout, with damage to oil and gas production facilities around the Gulf threatening to turn short-term shock into damage that could last for years. Some of the hardest hit countries are likely to be those with the least resources to confront that damage. To talk us through some of the repercussions, we're joined by Carlos Razo. He's senior coordinator at the UN Conference on Trade and Development. Carlos, let's start with the issue of fertilizer. Urea is the most widely used nitrogen-based fertilizer in the world. Its price is now nearly 80% higher than this time last year. UNCTAD is reporting that the countries likely to be the most affected by fertilizer shortages are among the poorest. So which countries are we talking about, and why are they so vulnerable?
Thank you very much. I think you're totally right. The prices of urea, one of the most used fertilizers, have skyrocketed since the beginning of the conflict. And some of the countries that buy fertilizers from this region are in Africa. So some of them include Sudan, Somalia, Kenya, Tanzania, or Mozambique. And they will be severely affected because in the absence of fertilizers, then the production yields of their agricultural production will suffer and will go down, with important consequences for prices.
Iran's attack on Qatar's main liquefied natural gas facility at the Ras Laffan has Qatari officials warning that the damage could take some 5 years to repair and reduce export capacity by 17%. What kind of effect do you think that could have on global fertilizer prices?
I think that would definitely put some upward pressure on fertilizer prices, and not only for the poorest countries in Africa, but around the world. That could also impact prices in Europe, for instance, and certainly in Asia. So that could lead to the increase in the cost of food production, and therefore the prices of food across the globe.
Well, you mentioned Asia there. We've been talking a lot about how Asia is one of the regions most dependent on Gulf fossil fuel production. Due to natural gas blockages in the strait, we've seen countries like India, Bangladesh, Pakistan shutting down their own fertilizer production due to natural gas shortages. How do you think is that likely to affect planting schedules in Asian agricultural regions?
Yeah, definitely. Also because you cannot just get the fertilizer and keep it in your warehouse for the next season. There is a moment where you need to plant and put the fertilizer. So if you don't get the fertilizer on time, then you lose the planting season. And then, as we were discussing, that leads to lower agricultural yields. So that's a severe concern for food security, not only in the countries that you mentioned, but across the globe.
Well, Carlos, stay with us because we're about to see that developing nations aren't the only ones to be affected by this fertilizer crisis. Here in Europe, farmers already under severe economic pressure are now facing not just high prices for their agricultural inputs, but shortages as well. Andrew Hillier has the story.
For Dirk Peters, the consequences of the war in Iran have landed on his doorstep. He relies on nitrogen fertilizer to feed his crops, spread across 2,500 hectares of sprawling farmland.
Our crops out in the field need nitrogen now. The sooner, the better, so they can get off to a good start, helping them establish themselves and build up reserves for the harvest later this summer.
Dirk needs 850 tons of fertilizer every spring. While some deliveries are still making it, roughly 30% of the global trade in fertilizers, which passes through the Strait of Hormuz, is stuck, and farmers in Germany are starting to feel the impact of supply shortages.
I know farmers who haven't received a single kilogram of nitrogen on their farms yet. They obviously have a huge problem because the entire crop is stunted. The plants aren't developing properly in their early stages, so they're going to face issues with both yield and quality. To some extent, the war has reached us here.
Lower crop yields will squeeze other sectors too, such as bread, poultry and eggs, heaping more pressure on farmers already feeling the pinch from higher fuel prices.
Overall, across the entire farm, or calculated over the whole year, we need around 120 litres of diesel per hectare. The difference in price between last year and current prices results in additional costs of around 6,000 euros.
Rising costs coming only months after farmers across Europe blocked borders and roads in protest at the EU-Mercosur trade deal. The war in Iran now adds to the uncertainty facing the continent's agricultural sector.
Now, Carlos, this fertilizer issue alone, as we've seen, is leading to fears of food inflation around the world. UNCTAD's latest report, though, shows also a close correlation between the cost of oil and the cost of food. We've so far seen the UK Farmer Union warning that food costs are about to rise there. We've seen cooking gas being rationed in India. What are some of the scenarios being considered as potential outcomes of the war, not just due to fertilizer, but also due to the cost of fuel and transport?
The point you mentioned is quite important. This is not only a fertilizer shock. This is an energy shock through oil markets and gas markets. So if we put it differently, these two ingredients, oil and gas, sustain the ways of living and the ways of production across the globe. So if those prices increase, the price of those inputs increase, the cost of production will increase across the board in all goods and services that we have. And that's what triggers what we economists call inflation. So that is a big concern. And one of the concerns as well is that particularly in poor countries that depend on imports for food, when food prices go up, the share of income that they allocate to food tends to be larger than in richer countries. So to give you an example, for example, in Kenya, on average, households allocate 50% of their income to food. In Switzerland, this share is around 9%. So when you increase prices of food and prices across the board, you really squeeze the budget of poor households in developed and particularly in developing countries.
Inflation caused by rising energy prices is often, sometimes at least, met by rising interest rates to try to combat inflation. The UNCTAD report notes that effect, too, could hit especially hard in developing countries with high debt burdens. How does that play out?
Yeah, that's also a very important point, because this puts pressure on public finances. And also what we have seen is in some countries already the bond yields, or putting it differently, the cost of debt is rising. And this is already a big problem. In the world, 46 countries currently pay more on interest rates than on what they pay on education services and health services. And to show you the magnitude of this, right now in the world, 3.4 billion people live in countries in that situation. So an increase in the cost of interest rate for debt could be a disaster for development prospects and for many families across the globe, and particularly in these nations that I've mentioned to you.
Well, the International Energy Agency calling this energy shock worse than the two crises of the 1970s and 1973, 1979. That crisis brought fuel efficiency standards, national speed limits to the United States, among other things, a host of reactions. How do we think this one might affect the green energy transition? Are there even ways to insulate the agriculture sector more from the fossil fuel sector via an energy transition?
I think this definitely could give incentives for the energy transition, but in the short run, this is a big shock for the economy and for many families. And also, if inflation comes in and if the cost of inputs increases, it is likely that economic growth will decelerate. And that, with this acceleration, this might also mean less investment in this energy transition. So on the one hand, you have that, yes, this could provide incentives, but on the other hand, this might decelerate investment in this renewable energy. Let's hope that is the first effect, the incentives on the renewable energy and energy transition, the effect that dominates this process.
And just to come back quickly to the question of debt in developing countries, we've seen an especially high level of sovereign debt growing over recent years, becoming a concern even before this energy crisis. Are we worried about a debt crisis if servicing all the debt becomes unaffordable?
Yeah, that is likely. It might be difficult to say that whether or not this will be a global crisis, but it will be a crisis definitely for some countries. And some of them are already on the edge. As I said, if a country is paying more in servicing their debt than paying for education and infrastructure or health, then that's a very critical situation. That becomes a development crisis more than a debt crisis. So we should be careful about.
All right. Carlos Razo, Senior Coordinator at the UN Conference on Trade and Development. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us here on People and Profit.
Thank you very much to you.
Well, that's all for now. Don't forget, you can catch all our previous shows on our website or as a podcast, wherever you usually listen. Until next time, thanks for watching.